Hello class, and welcome to today's math lesson. To get us started, we are going to take a look at our objective. So our objective for today is students will be able to use diagrams to solve fraction word problems. Before we get going with the lesson, I do have a quick review for us. I just want you to think about these two questions for a minute. A fraction represents a blank of a whole. And what is special about the numerator of a unit fraction? These questions should be automatic for you by now, but go ahead and take a minute and think about these. Have the answers fresh in your mind. Okay, so a fraction represents a part of a whole. And what is special about the numerators of unit fractions? Well, the numerator of unit fractions is always 1. We must remember that, friends. So some examples of unit fractions for us. We have 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/5, and so on. So keep those two things in the back of your mind as we continue to expand our knowledge on fractions with today's lesson. So for today, we're going to use a tool on GeoGebra all about Pedro's string. So let's go ahead and check that out, friends. So as we know from our objective, I told you that we will be working with fraction word problems, and we are going to use diagrams to help us solve those problems. So let's go ahead and read the word problem to get us started. So, Pedro had a piece of string. Pedro gave Bill 1/3 of the string. Pedro gave Jen 1/2 of the leftover string. Pedro had 6 feet of string after giving pieces to Bill and Jen. How long was the string before Pedro gave Bill and Jen pieces of it? So the first read, this sounds like we have a lot of steps, and we do, but we're going to break those down and we're going to use diagrams to help us solve this. So we know Pedro had a piece of string, and our first piece of information is he gave Bill 1/3 of the string. So let's go ahead and take a look at what our diagram might look like at first. So this blue overarching line here that expands this whole fraction bar represents Pedro's entire piece of string. But then we notice that the diagram is then broken into 1, 2, 3 parts. We know a fraction is what? A part of a whole. So this green part that is shaded represents Bill's part of the whole piece of string, and we know Bill received 1/3. We'll go ahead and label that so we know that's Bill's. But what's next? Pedro gave Jen 1/2 of the leftover string. So remember, friends, we have to look for key words so we don't mess up. So we know that Pedro didn't give Jen 1/2 of the whole piece of string. That's impossible because he already gave Bill 1/3. He gave her 1/2 of the leftover string. So we know the green shaded is Bill's. So these white parts, these two parts here, must be the leftover. So what might that look like on our diagram? Well, if we drag those two parts down, we can then see they were already broken into 2 parts, and Jen received 1/2, so if you take 1/2 of 2, you have 1, right? So there's Jen's piece. Let's go ahead and drag that up here next to Bill's so we can see, again, the string as a whole. So our next piece of information, Pedro had 6 feet of string after giving pieces to Bill and Jen. So if we know this is Bill's piece here, and this is Jen's, this white piece here, this leftover, it's Pedro's. So, and it tells us right here in our problem, Pedro had 6 feet of string after giving pieces to Bill and Jen. So this piece here equals 6 feet. So again, let's go ahead and drag that up here. So now, what do we notice that happened? Bill was given a third, and then we had 2/3 left over, and Jen was given 1/2 of those 2/3. So she was really given her own third. So that means 1/3 was given to Bill, another third to Jen, so that's 2/3, which means Pedro was left with his own 1/3. And we know that Pedro's piece equaled 6 feet. So if we know Pedro had a third, and his equaled 6 feet, then Bill and Jen's 1/3 must also equal 6 feet. So then what our question is asking is, how long was the string before Pedro gave Bill and Jen pieces of it? So it's essentially just asking us, how long is the string all together? All the pieces together. So if we know we have 6 here and 6 here, and another 6 here, what do? We add 6 together 3 times, or use our multiplication, 6 times 3. So 6, 12, 18. So let's say Pedro had 18 feet of string before he gave string to Bill and Jen. So I feel pretty confident about our answer for 18. Let's go ahead and give that a check. We're correct. Okay, friends, so now we're going to walk through another one together. We're going to change our values up a bit before you try this on your own. So let me go ahead and clear our workspace for us. So this time, what if I said Pedro gave Bill 1/5 of the string? I'm going to leave it so that Pedro still gives Jen 1/2 of the leftover string. But now I'm going to say Pedro had 10 feet of string after giving pieces to Bill and Jen. But our question will remain the same. How long was the string before Pedro gave Bill and Jen pieces of it? So this time, when we draw our diagram for our piece of string, what would we start with? The last time we broke our string down into 1/3 because Pedro gave Bill 1/3 of the string, but this time Pedro's giving Bill 1/5 of the string. So I think our diagram this time will be broken down into fifths. Let's see if Miss Seitzer is correct. Oh, here we go. So we know again our blue line represents our entire piece of string, so Pedro's whole piece of string. And then our parts here represent the different parts. So Pedro gave the parts of the whole. So Pedro gave Bill 1/5 of the string. So this block here, shaded in green, represents Bill's 1/5. So we have 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, and 5/5 to make our whole. So now Pedro gave Jen 1/2 of the leftover string. So just as we did the last time, we know the green shaded part was Bill's. So these 4 white parts must be our leftover. And Jen will receive 1/2 of that leftover string. So if we know we have 4 parts left, if we take half of 4, we get 2, right? So Jen must receive 2 of these parts. Let's go ahead and check. Okay, so our diagram now, we drug down the leftover down here. But what our GeoGebra tool did for us was we had our 4 parts up here, And to make it simplify the problem for us, when they did just 2 halves down here. So 2 parts became 1, and these 2 parts became 1. And we know Jen still only received 1/2, so she gets this 1/2, shaded in orange for her. So let's go ahead and drag that back up here. But now what do we notice? We still have our lines here to represent our fifths. So now we can clearly see, if we know Bill received 1/5, then Jen received 1/2. And then how many fifths does Pedro have left over, friends? He also has 1/2. So we know our problem told us Pedro had 10 feet of string after giving pieces to Bill and Jen. So we know that these leftover pieces here equal 10. And then what do we notice about these 2 pieces? We know that they are 1/5, 2/5, right? So if 10 equals 2/5, what would 1/5 equal? Would we take half of 10? I think we would. So we would have how many here? We would have 5, right? 5 feet. If we take half of 10, we know that is 5. So we have 5 feet for that 1/5, and then another 5 feet for the other. That gives us, we know, the 10 feet. So we know now 1/5 equals 5 feet. And then we know that Bill, he also had a 1/5, so we know his piece would be 5. And then Jen, we know, received 2/5, which we said was how many? 10 feet. Or, go back to our 1/5 equals 5 feet, and give her 5 here, and another 5 here. So now we are looking collectively at our whole piece of string again, and we know exactly what each part equals. So now what's our question asking us again? How long was the string before Pedro gave Bill and Jen pieces of it? So basically, again, just asking us how long is that piece of string collectively, all parts together? How big is the whole? How long is the whole piece of string? So again, we can add our parts up together. 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5. Or simplified, we could just say 5 times 5. And what do we know does that equal, friends? 5 times 5 gives us 25 feet. So let's go ahead and check that. And we are correct. So that is today's lesson, friends, on how to use diagrams to solve fraction word problems. Next, you are going to take an assessment so I can see what you got from today's lesson and if you need further help on today's objective. Thank you for listening.